Evelyn's heart burned like acid as she stumbled through the forest, her soaked dress clinging to trembling limbs while cold drizzle cut through her skin like tiny knives. Behind her, the village lights grew smaller, swallowed by darkness that promised refuge from their disgusted stares and whispered accusations. She had nowhere else to run, nowhere else to hide from the truth that had shattered her world in a single devastating moment. The rain fell harder now, turning the forest floor into a slippery maze of fallen leaves and hidden roots. Each step forward took her deeper into territory she didn't understand. But anything was better than facing another dawn in that cursed place where everyone now knew her secret, where they had seen her for what she truly was and found her wanting. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath, but she pushed forward, clutching the small leather bag that held everything she owned. The orange blossom scarf around her neck, already heavy with moisture, carried the last traces of a home that no longer wanted her. The wooden flute, tucked safely in her bag, pressed against her ribs with each stumbling step, a reminder of better days when music had been joy instead of judgment. The ancient map crinkled softly in her bag, its mysterious symbols suddenly feeling less like curiosity and more like destiny. Old Henrik, her childhood guardian, had pressed it into her hands years ago with clouded eyes and trembling fingers, whispering about paths that would reveal themselves when the time came. She had thought him mad then, lost in the ramblings of age. Now, fleeing through a forest that seemed to breathe around her, those symbols felt like her only hope of finding sanctuary. A branch snapped behind her, and Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. She spun around, eyes wide, but saw only shifting shadows and the ghostly outline of trees disappearing into mist. The silence stretched until her own breathing sounded deafening, until every drop of rain hitting leaves became a whisper of pursuit. Then the howl came. It rose from somewhere deep in the forest, a sound that seemed to vibrate through her bones and settle in places she didn't know existed. Not the desperate cry of a wild animal, but something else entirely. Something that made her skin tighten and her blood sing with recognition she couldn't explain. The presence surrounded her before she could run again, massive and warm and impossible to ignore. The air shifted, carrying scents of damp earth and crushed grass, of wood smoke and something wild that made her pulse skip. Even the rain seemed to pause, as if the forest itself held its breath. When the wolf stepped into the small clearing, Evelyn's world tilted sideways. He was enormous, dark fur glistening with moisture, eyes that caught what little moonlight filtered through the canopy. But instead of teeth and snarls, instead of the attack she expected, he approached with careful steps and lowered his great head. The gesture stopped her heart. Submission from something so powerful felt wrong, impossible. Yet there he was, offering his neck in a display of vulnerability that spoke louder than words. "No," she whispered, pressing back against a tree trunk that felt suddenly fragile. "This isn't real. This can't be happening." The wolf's eyes met hers, and she saw intelligence there that made her knees weak. Recognition that terrified her more than fangs ever could. When he began to shift, bones lengthening and fur receding, she should have run, should have screamed. Instead, she stood frozen as magic transformed the creature into a man who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. He was tall and broad, with dark hair that curled from dampness and skin marked by scars that spoke of battles won and lost. His clothes appeared as if woven from shadow, practical and weathered. But it was his eyes that held her captive, the same impossible shade that had looked at her from the wolf's face. "You're safe," he said, his voice rough from disuse, but gentle in a way that made tears threaten. "I'm Darius, alpha of this territory, and you—" He paused, nostrils flaring slightly as he scented the air. "You're mine." The word hit her like a physical blow. "I'm no one's," she managed, proud of how steady her voice sounded, despite the chaos in her chest. "I don't even know what you are." "You know." His certainty made her want to flee and step closer in equal measure. "Your body knows, even if your mind fights it. I can hear your heartbeat, smell your fear mixed with something else, something that calls to me." "You're wrong." But even as she said it, warmth spread through her limbs. a recognition that felt older than thought. I'm just lost, just looking for shelter. The forest brought you to me. Darius took another careful step forward, hands visible and unthreatening. The rain guided your steps to this clearing, this moment. Do you think that's coincidence? Evelyn's fingers found the orange blossom scarf, twisting the damp fabric as if it could anchor her to sanity. I think you're dangerous. I think I should run. You could try. His smile held no mockery, only sad understanding. But where will you go? Back to the village that cast you out? Forward into forest you don't understand? The truth of his words stung worse than the rain. She had nothing behind her but shame, and nowhere ahead but uncertainty. The leather bag with her few possessions felt impossibly heavy, weighted with the reality that this strange, impossible man might be her only option for survival. What do you want from me? She asked. Nothing you're not willing to give. Darius's voice carried conviction that made her believe him despite every instinct screaming caution. But I can offer you shelter, safety, a place to rest while you decide what comes next. And the price? Time. Let me prove what I already know. Let the forest show you what it showed me the moment your scent reached my territory. As if summoned by his words, the rain began to ease, drizzle gentling to mist that clung to their skin like whispered promises. The forest around them seemed to lean in, waiting for her answer. Evelyn closed her eyes, trying to think past the exhaustion and fear and strange pull she felt toward this man who claimed to be something impossible. When she opened them again, he was still watching her with patience that felt infinite. One night, she said finally. Shelter for one night, and then I decide. One night, he agreed. But something in his voice suggested he knew it would be more. The path he led her down seemed to appear beneath their feet, winding through trees that parted like curtains. His pack's territory revealed itself slowly, carefully, as if the forest itself was introducing them. Small cabins nestled among ancient oaks, smoke rising from chimneys, warm light spilling from windows that glowed like earthbound stars. No one came to stare as they passed, but Evelyn felt eyes watching from shadows, felt the weight of judgment she'd fled. The difference here was the quality of that attention. Not disgust or fear, but curiosity mixed with something that might have been hope. They're wondering if it's true, Darius said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. If the stories their grandmothers told were more than tales. What stories? He paused at the door of a cabin set slightly apart from the others, hand resting on wood worn smooth by weather and time. Stories of mates who come with the rain, who bring abundance when welcomed, devastation when turned away. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable, a stone fireplace already crackling with warmth, furs and woven blankets making the space feel like a haven. Evelyn set her bag down carefully, fingers trailing over surfaces that felt more like home than anywhere she'd been. The fire was already lit, she observed. I felt you coming before the first raindrop fell. Darius remained by the door, giving her space. This place has been waiting. For how long? Since I became alpha. Since the loneliness started eating at my bones during nights when the mist rolls thick enough to drown in. His honesty was a gift she hadn't expected. Vulnerability from someone who could have simply taken what he wanted. It made the warmth in her chest expand, made the recognition she'd been fighting feel less like weakness and more like possibility. That night, alone in the cabin while he kept respectful distance, Evelyn pulled out Henrik's map. The symbols seemed to glow in the firelight, revealing details she'd never noticed. Paths marked with small crescents, clearings indicated by spirals that looked almost like... She traced one with her finger, and understanding bloomed like sunrise. Wolf signs, territory markers. The map hadn't been random wandering routes at all, but a careful guide to this exact place. Henrik had known. Somehow, he'd known she would need to find sanctuary among creatures most people believed were myths. The revelation should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the last piece of a puzzle sliding into place. When morning came, soft light filtering through windows that faced east toward hope, Evelyn found herself humming as she prepared to leave the cabin. The tune came from nowhere, wordless melody that seemed to rise from her bones. She pulled out her wooden flute, the one Henrik had pressed into her hands with the map, and let the melody flow through the carved wood. The notes danced through the air, pure and sweet, and something magical happened. Birds began to gather outside the windows, their songs joining hers in harmonies that should have been impossible. Small forest creatures crept closer, drawn by music that spoke to something primal in their hearts. And then, walking through the morning mist like a figure from a dream, came Darius. He had shifted back to human form, but moved with the same careful grace, eyes fixed on her with wonder that made her breath catch. The flute's song faltered, then found new strength as their gazes met. "That melody," he said when the last note faded. "I've heard it in dreams. I've never played it before. It just..." She gestured helplessly with the flute. "It came from somewhere else. The forest remembers songs from before." Darius stepped closer, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "Before we forgot how to listen properly." "Your people are watching us," Evelyn whispered, suddenly aware of faces at windows, figures lingering near doorways. "They're hoping," he corrected, "hoping that what they see means the stories are true. That abundance follows those who make music with the morning." The whispers began that afternoon, carried on wind that seemed to deliberately spread the news. The outsider had called their alpha with ancient melodies. The forest had answered her music with creatures that hadn't been seen together in years. The signs pointed to one conclusion, one possibility that made hearts race and tongues loosen. But with hope came scrutiny. Evelyn felt it in every glance, every conversation that stopped when she appeared, every test disguised as casual interaction. Mira, the pack's beta, was the first to approach directly. She was beautiful in the way of wild things, all lean muscle and sharp intelligence, moving with confidence earned through combat and politics. When she appeared at the cabin door on the third evening, her smile held edges that could cut. "So," Mira said, settling onto the porch steps without invitation. "You're the one who's got our alpha acting like a lovesick pup." "I'm the one seeking shelter," Evelyn replied carefully. "Nothing more. Everything's something more in pack territory." Mira's eyes held challenge and curiosity in equal measure, especially when it involves music that makes the forest sit up and take notice. "I can't control what happens when I play, but you can control whether you stay or go." The beta's directness was refreshing after days of whispered speculation. "So what's it to be?" One night has already stretched to 3. Evelyn considered her answer carefully. In the village, she'd been judged and found wanting. Here, she was being evaluated for completely different reasons, by people who saw potential instead of problem. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Everything here is strange, including how right it feels." Mira's smile softened, becoming something that might grow into friendship. "Strange is relative. I've seen normal, and it's boring as death." That night, around a fire that crackled with cedar and pine, Evelyn met the pack's healer. Marcus was a quiet man, whose hands always seemed to know where they were needed, whose eyes missed nothing important. He offered her tea without explanation, watching as she sipped the bitter brew made from bark and herbs. "What is this?" she asked, noting how her racing pulse began to slow. "Clarity," Marcus said simply. "So your heart can hear itself think." The effect was subtle but profound. The constant flutter of anxiety that had plagued her since arriving settled into something manageable. The confusion about what she felt versus what she thought she should feel began to separate into distinct streams. "The alpha requested this? The alpha doesn't know about healing teas unless someone's bleeding." Marcus's voice carried gentle humor. "This is my choice, to help you understand what you're feeling without the noise of fear." As the tea worked through her system, Evelyn felt pieces of herself settling into new configurations. The panic that had driven her flight from the village, the desperate gratitude for shelter, the undeniable pull toward Darius, all of it remained, but clearer now. Distinct emotions she could examine instead of the churning mass that had been drowning her. "Why?" she asked. "Because choice made in clarity lasts longer than choice made in chaos." Marcus began cleaning his hands with water that steamed in the cool air. "And because whatever you decide affects all of us." The honesty was startling. In her old life, People had hidden their motivations behind pleasantries and social conventions. Here, she was learning, directness was considered kindness. When Darius appeared at the fire's edge, drawn perhaps by instincts that told him she was no longer spiraling in confusion, Evelyn felt ready to face what existed between them. "Better?" he asked, settling beside her with careful distance. "Different," she replied, and saw him smile at her honesty. "The Council of Elders wants to meet with you," he said after the fire had burned lower. "Tomorrow, if you're willing. And if I'm not, then you're not ready, and we wait." The patience in his voice was becoming familiar, this steady certainty that time would reveal truth. It should have frustrated her, this assumption that she would eventually come around to his way of thinking. Instead, it felt like being seen fully and accepted completely. What do they want to know? Same things I want to know. Same things you're still figuring out. Darius poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into darkness. Whether the pull between us is real or just desperation. Whether you're running toward something or just away from everything else. The questions hung in air, scented with wood smoke and possibility. Around them, the pack settled into evening routines, doors closing on warm light, voices calling goodnights across the clearing. Domestic sounds that spoke of belonging, of home, built through shared purpose and mutual protection. "I dreamed about this place," Evelyn said quietly. "Before I knew it existed. I thought they were just dreams about forests and safety. But now I think they were invitations." Darius's hand found hers in the space between them, fingers intertwining like they'd done it countless times before. The touch sent warmth racing up her arm, but not the desperate heat of physical attraction. Something deeper, older, more patient. "The forest has its own wisdom," he said. "Its own ways of calling what it needs. And you think it called me? I think we called each other, and the forest helped us listen." That night, alone again in the cabin that was beginning to feel like sanctuary, Evelyn spread Henrik's map across the rough wooden table. By candlelight, the symbols revealed more secrets. Not just paths and territories, but timing markers, seasonal notations, moon phases that aligned with specific routes. The map was a calendar as much as a guide, showing not just where to go, but when. And according to the careful markings, she had arrived at exactly the right time, in exactly the right season, following exactly the right path. The coincidence felt too precise to be random, too perfect to be accidental, which left only one possibility that made her heart race with equal parts terror and anticipation. Someone had planned this. Someone had known she would need this place, these people, this impossible connection to a man who claimed destiny had tied them together. The question was whether she had the courage to trust in plans made by forces she couldn't understand, or whether fear would send her running again into darkness that no longer felt like freedom. As wind whispered through trees that seemed to lean closer to her windows, Evelyn closed her eyes and let herself imagine what it might feel like to stop running. To plant roots in soil that welcomed them. To wake each morning not wondering where safety lay, but knowing she had found it. The image was so beautiful it hurt. And that was how she knew, with certainty that settled into her bones like coming home, that she was going to stay long enough to discover whether dreams could become reality, or whether hope was just another word for beautiful disaster waiting to happen. But first, she had to face the elders. And somehow find the courage to tell them the truth she was only beginning to understand herself. The Council of Elders met in a grove where ancient oaks twisted their branches into a natural cathedral, their bark scarred with symbols that predated memory. Evelyn's breath misted in the frigid morning air as she followed the winding path, her fingers clutching the orange blossom scarf for comfort. Behind her, Darius walked with the measured pace of someone approaching judgment, his presence both reassuring and terrifying. "Remember," he murmured as they reached the grove's entrance, "they've been waiting longer than you know. Don't let their intensity frighten you into silence." The circle of 5 elders sat on stones worn smooth by centuries of use, their faces reflecting the wisdom and weight of ages. At their center sat a woman whose pale blue eyes seemed to look through time itself, her silver hair braided with beads that caught the weak winter light. This was Elena, the eldest, and when her gaze settled on Evelyn, it felt like being examined by the forest itself. "Approach, child of the rain." Elena's voice carried the authority of seasons changing, of tides turning according to laws older than written word. "Let us see what the forest has brought to our territory." Evelyn stepped forward, acutely aware that every breath, every heartbeat, every flicker of emotion was being catalogued and evaluated. The other elders watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism, their silence heavy with expectation. "You carry instruments of power," observed a male elder whose face bore the ritual scars of ancient ceremonies. "The map, the flute, the scarf that holds memory. Tell us how they came to you." "My guardian gave them to me," Evelyn replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Henrik said they would help me find my path when the time came." "Henrik Thornfield," Elena said, and the name carried weight that made the other elders shift in recognition. "The Wanderer. We wondered what became of his final charge." "You knew him?" "We knew his purpose." Elena rose from her stone seat with fluid grace that defied her apparent age. "He was our eyes beyond the forest, our ears in the human settlements. When he took you as ward, we understood that the old prophecies might yet unfold." The revelation hit Evelyn like ice water. "Prophecies? The rainmate legend," said another elder, her voice gentle with sympathy for the shock written across Evelyn's face. "Women who arrive with autumn storms, bearing gifts that sing to our alpha's soul. They bring abundance when welcomed, devastation when rejected." "Henrik prepared you," Elena continued, circling Evelyn with steps that seemed to read her very bones. "Taught you music that speaks to the wild heart, gave you maps that show paths between worlds, wrapped you in scents that carry memory across seasons." "I don't understand." But even as Evelyn spoke, pieces were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "He never said anything about prophecies or rainmates. He just said the forest would call when I needed shelter. Because choice made in ignorance is still choice." Elena's eyes glittered with approval. "You came here seeking safety, not seeking power. That matters more than you know." Darius stepped closer, close enough that his warmth cut through the morning chill. "The council needs to know your intentions," he said quietly. "Whether you're here to stay or just passing through. I need to know what staying means." Evelyn looked around the circle, meeting each elder's gaze in turn. "What you expect from someone like me?" "We expect nothing," Elena said, "but we offer everything. Partnership with our alpha, protection of our pack, abundance of our territory. In exchange for the gifts you bring, the harmony you create, the future you might build. And if I can't live up to the legend, then you live up to yourself." The words came from the scarred elder, carrying conviction that surprised her. "Legends are just stories we tell about real people who faced impossible choices. What matters is what you choose when the choosing becomes real." As if summoned by his words, snow began to fall in thick, lazy flakes that transformed the grove into something from a fairy tale. The elders watched the sky with expressions that suggested this was no coincidence. "The forest speaks," Elena murmured. "Snow to mark new beginnings, cold to test what burns true." "What does that mean?" Evelyn asked. "It means," Darius said, his breath creating clouds in the suddenly frigid air, "that we're about to be tested. The council is about to invoke the trial of 2 moons." Elena nodded gravely. "From this day until the second new moon, you will live as bonded pairs without completing the final rite. Share space, share purpose, share the small frictions that reveal true compatibility. If the bond survives daily irritations and nightly dreams, then we will know it's real." The pronouncement settled over them like the falling snow, beautiful and cold and inescapable. Evelyn felt her heart stutter as the implications sank in. 6 weeks of living with Darius, pretending to be something she wasn't sure she was, under the constant scrutiny of a pack that wanted to believe in legends. "What if we fail?" she asked. "Then you find other paths," Elena replied simply. "The forest has many trails, and not all of them lead to the same destination." As they walked back through snow that crunched beneath their feet, Evelyn wrestled with the weight of expectation now resting on her shoulders. The pack members they passed offered smiles and nods, but she could see the hope in their eyes, the careful optimism of people who wanted desperately to believe in something larger than themselves. "Regrets?" Darius asked as they reached the cabin that would now be their shared space. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not regrets. Not yet." "Good." He held the door open, gesturing her inside to warmth that felt like embrace. "Terror keeps you honest. Regret just keeps you paralyzed." The next weeks unfolded like pages in a book written by winter itself. Snow piled against windows while inside, Evelyn and Darius learned the careful dance of shared space without shared understanding. He woke before dawn to check territory boundaries. She rose with the sun to practice melodies that seemed to improve the weather. They cooked simple meals together, navigating around each other in the small kitchen with the awkward politeness of strangers, pretending intimacy. The friction Elena had predicted manifested in small ways that tested patience. Darius left muddy boots by the door and forgot to bank the fire before sleep. Evelyn hummed unconsciously while cooking, creating harmonies that made him stop mid-sentence to stare. They disagreed about everything from firewood stacking to the proper way to fold blankets, tiny incompatibilities that highlighted how little they actually knew each other. But there were moments of grace too. Evenings when conversation flowed like water finding its level, when laughter came easily and silence felt comfortable instead of strained. Mornings when they woke to find they'd unconsciously moved closer during sleep, seeking warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. "You're holding back," Mira observed during one of her daily visits, ostensibly to report pack business, but really to monitor their progress. "Both of you, dancing around each other like you're afraid of stepping on toes." "Maybe we are," Evelyn replied, kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. "This whole situation is insane. Living with someone I barely know, pretending we're destined mates while everyone watches for signs of compatibility." "Pretending?" Mira's eyebrows rose. "Is that what you call the way you both relax when the other enters a room? The way your breathing synchronizes when you're sleeping? You've been watching us sleep? Pack territory, pack business." Mira's grin was unrepentant. "Besides, Marcus asked me to keep an eye on things. Make sure the stress isn't making either of you sick. And you're both idiots if you think what's happening between you is anything but real." That night, as wind howled around the cabin and snow piled higher against the windows, Evelyn found herself studying Darius as he read by firelight. His face in profile showed the strong lines that marked him as alpha, but also the gentle focus he brought to whatever captured his attention. She'd learned he read everything from pack histories to technical manuals about sustainable forestry, his curiosity as broad as his responsibilities. "Question?" he asked without looking up, apparently sensing her scrutiny. "How do you do it?" The words came out in a rush before she could second-guess them. "Lead people who are counting on you to have all the answers?" He set down his book, giving her question the consideration it deserved. "I don't have all the answers, but I listen to the people who might, and I try to make decisions based on what's best for everyone instead of what's easiest for me." "That sounds exhausting." "Some days." His smile held rueful honesty. "Other days it feels like the most natural thing in the world, especially since you arrived." "Me? I haven't done anything to help with leadership. You've reminded me why leadership matters." Darius shifted closer on the couch they shared, close enough that she could see firelight dancing in his eyes. "Before you came, I was protecting territory and maintaining traditions because it was my duty. Now I'm building something worth protecting, worth passing down." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "Darius, I know we're supposed to be taking this slowly, testing compatibility, seeing if what we feel is real or just desperation masquerading as destiny." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with familiar ease. "But every day makes it clearer that what I feel for you isn't going anywhere. Even when I leave music scattered around the cabin and forget to tell you when I'm going for walks. Especially then." His thumb traced patterns on her palm that sent warmth racing up her arm. "Your music makes the cabin feel alive. Your walks always bring you back with something interesting to share. The elders could still decide we're not compatible. The elders can decide whatever they want. The only opinions that matter are ours." Before she could overthink it, Evelyn leaned closer and kissed him. It was supposed to be brief, experimental, a test of whether physical attraction matched the emotional connection growing between them. Instead, it became something that rewrote every assumption she'd had about desire and belonging. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the world felt fundamentally changed. "Well," Darius said, resting his forehead against hers, "that was definitely not taking it slowly. Do you mind?" "I mind that we waited this long." From that night forward, the careful politeness between them dissolved into something warmer and more complicated. They still disagreed about small things, still navigated the awkwardness of shared space and separate uncertainties, but underneath it all ran a current of connection that grew stronger with each passing day. The pack noticed the change immediately. Smiles became more genuine, hope more tangible. Even the weather seemed to respond. Harsh winds gentling to breezes that carried sense of approaching spring. "The forest approves," Marcus commented during one of his evening visits, observing the way Evelyn and Darius moved around each other with unconscious coordination. "Plants are starting to wake up early, animals coming out of hibernation to test the air." "It's still winter," Evelyn protested. "Calendar winter, yes, but nature responds to more than dates. Responds to harmony, to balance, to the kind of energy that makes things grow." It was Marcus who revealed the next piece of the puzzle that had brought her to this place. During a session where he taught her about local herbs and their healing properties, he mentioned something that made her hands still over the plants she was sorting. "Henrik used to gather these same herbs," he said casually. "Every autumn when he visited, he'd spend hours in our gardens, learning which ones grew best in our soil." "He visited here? Regularly?" "Every year for decades. Said he was keeping watch over something precious, making sure it stayed safe until the time came." "What was he watching over?" Marcus's eyes met hers with gentle understanding. "You, child. He was watching over you." The revelation that Henrik had been in contact with the pack throughout her childhood reframed everything she thought she knew about her past. The stories he'd told about forest spirits, the songs he'd taught her, the map he'd pressed into her hands. All of it had been preparation for a destiny she'd never suspected. "Did he know?" she asked that night as she and Darius sat by the fire. "Did he know what would happen when I got here?" "He knew you'd need sanctuary," Darius replied carefully. "He knew the pack would recognize what you could offer. Beyond that," he shrugged, "I think he trusted the forest to handle the details. I feel like everyone knew things about my life that I didn't know myself. Maybe because the people who cared about you wanted to make sure you had choices when the time came. Henrik could have told you everything from the beginning, but then you might have felt obligated instead of free to choose." The wisdom in his words soothed some of the resentment she'd been nurturing. Henrik had indeed given her choices, even if he'd hidden the context that made those choices meaningful. As the first moon cycle completed and they moved into the second phase of their trial, a new challenge emerged. Elena arrived at their cabin on a morning when frost painted intricate patterns on every surface, her expression carrying news that would test them in ways they hadn't expected. "The neighboring territory has sent emissaries," she announced without preamble. "They're questioning our right to harbor someone who arrived without their permission." "What does that mean?" Evelyn asked, though the chill in her spine suggested she already knew. "It means," Darius said, his voice taking on the alpha authority she'd seen him use with challenging pack members, "that they're looking for an excuse to cause trouble, and they think you might be it." "Can they force me to leave?" "Not as long as you're under pack protection," Elena replied. "But they can make things difficult. Challenge our territorial claims, disrupt hunting grounds, make alliances with other packs who might be nervous about the changes your presence is bringing." "What changes?" "Early spring, improved hunting, territory animals that usually migrate staying close to our borders." Elena's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. "The kind of changes that make neighbors nervous about missing out. So they want to share whatever benefits they think I'm bringing." "They want to control them," Darius corrected grimly. "Control you through marriage alliances or territorial agreements that would give them influence over pack decisions." The political ramifications made Evelyn's head spin. She'd come here seeking simple shelter and somehow become a resource that others wanted to claim or control. There's more, Elena continued. They're demanding proof that your bond with Darius is genuine. A public ceremony before the next new moon, with witnesses from multiple packs. And if we refuse, then they argue that you're a rogue element, unattached to any pack structure, fair game for whoever can claim you first. The casual way Elena described what amounted to kidnapping made Evelyn's blood run cold. That's legal? Legal and traditional, Darius said, his jaw tight with anger. Which is why we're not going to let it happen. What are our options? We complete the bonding ceremony, Elena said simply. Make your connection official, permanent, and legally unbreakable under pack law. But we haven't finished the trial period. The trial period ends when circumstances require it to end. Elena's smile held edges sharp enough to cut, and I'd say these circumstances qualify. That night, as they lay together on the narrow cabin bed, listening to wind that carried threats from beyond their territory, Evelyn struggled with the reality that her choice was being forced by people who saw her as property instead of person. We could run, Darius said quietly, his arm tightening around her. Leave the territory, find somewhere they can't follow, and abandon your pack? Your responsibilities? I've been alpha for 8 years. The pack is strong enough to choose a new leader if necessary. The offer, sincere as it was, made her heart ache with love and frustration in equal measure. You'd give up everything for me? I'd give up anything for you. But I'd rather fight for the right to keep everything, including me, especially you. His certainty was both gift and burden, love and pressure combined in ways that made her feel precious and trapped simultaneously. But as she drifted toward sleep, surrounded by warmth and scents that now felt like home, one truth settled into her bones with absolute clarity. She didn't want to run, didn't want to spend her life looking over her shoulder, wondering if safety was real or just temporary respite between disasters. She wanted to stay and fight for the life she was building, the love she was discovering, the community that had welcomed her despite her fears, which meant that tomorrow she would have to tell the elders she was ready for whatever came next, including ceremonies that would bind her to this place and these people forever. The snow continued falling as she slept, covering the world in white that reflected moonlight like scattered diamonds. But for the first time since arriving in pack territory, Evelyn dreamed not of running or hiding, but of roots growing deep enough to weather any storm. The morning of the bonding ceremony arrived with spring's first whisper, snow melting into streams that sang with voices older than memory. Evelyn woke to find Elena standing in their cabin doorway, her pale eyes reflecting worry that made the alpha's stomach clench with dread. They're here, Elena said without preamble. 3 packs, all claiming territorial disputes that require immediate resolution. How many? Darius was already reaching for the clothes he'd laid out the night before, movements sharp with controlled urgency. 47 wolves, 12 alphas, and 1 very ambitious female who claims you promised her consideration before taking an outsider to mate. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. Who? Valeria Blackthorn, alpha of the Northern Reaches, daughter of the most powerful pack alliance in the mountains. Elena's expression showed exactly what she thought of these claims. She arrived at dawn with enough witnesses to make this complicated. This is about more than me, isn't it? Evelyn struggled into the ceremonial dress Elena had brought, pale green fabric that seemed to shimmer with its own light. This is about territory and power and alliances I don't understand. You're the catalyst, Elena confirmed, the excuse they've been waiting for to challenge our independence. If they can prove our bond is illegitimate, they can argue that our recent prosperity is unnatural, grounds for territorial redistribution. And if they can't, then they acknowledge you as true mate to our alpha, accept our claim to expanded hunting grounds, and submit to the judgment of the Greater Council. The stakes made Evelyn's hands shake as she tried to fasten the dress's intricate closures. Everything she'd found here, everything she'd learned to love, hung in the balance of a ceremony that felt more like trial by combat than celebration of union. There's something else, Elena said quietly. The Greater Council has sent a representative, someone who knew Henrik, who claims to have information about your true parentage. My parentage? The words came out strangled. Henrik told me my parents died when I was young, that he was their friend who agreed to raise me. Henrik told many stories to many people. Not all of them were complete truth. Before Evelyn could demand explanations, Darius appeared at her side, magnificent in formal leathers that marked him as Pack Alpha. But it was the expression in his eyes that steadied her, the absolute certainty that whatever they faced, they would face together. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "No," she replied honestly, "but let's do this anyway." The ceremony ground had been transformed overnight into something from legend. Ancient stones arranged in spirals that seemed to channel energy from earth and sky. Banners bearing symbols that predated written language. Fires that burned with flames colored by herbs that made the air itself seem magical. But it was the crowd that made Evelyn's breath catch. Pack members from territories she'd never heard of, dressed in formal regalia that spoke of wealth and power and ancient allegiances. At their center sat a woman whose beauty was sharp enough to cut, dark hair braided with silver that caught sunlight like weapons. Valeria Blackthorne looked exactly like what she was, a predator who'd never learned to doubt her own supremacy. When her eyes met Evelyn's across the ceremonial ground, the smile that curved her lips held promises of pain. "So," Valeria called out, her voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence. "This is the little bird who thinks she can sing alpha songs. This is the woman who saved our territory from the worst drought in living memory," Elena replied, stepping forward with authority that made even visiting alphas shift uncomfortably. "The mate whose music calls rain and whose presence brings abundance." "Abundance?" Valeria's laugh was like ice breaking. "Or coincidence masquerading as magic? I see no proof that this outsider is anything more than clever timing and prettier than average features." "Then perhaps," said a new voice, "it's time for proof." The figure who stepped from the crowd made Evelyn's world tilt sideways, tall and elegant, with silver hair and eyes the exact shade of her own, wearing robes that marked her as High Counselor of the Greater Assembly. But it was the way she moved, the familiar grace that Evelyn recognized from her own mirror, that made her knees weak. "I am Cordelia Ravenwood," the woman announced, "High Counselor, keeper of bloodlines, and grandmother to the young woman you see before you." The revelation hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. Evelyn heard gasps, whispers, the sound of political calculations being hastily revised. But all she could focus on was the woman who claimed to be family she'd never known existed. "Henrik said my parents were dead," she whispered. "Your parents are dead," Cordelia replied gently. "But your mother was my daughter, heir to one of the oldest pack alliances in the Northern Territories, which makes you not just any outsider, but pack royalty with legitimate claim to territories that stretch from here to the Great Lakes." "You're lying." But even as Valeria spoke, her voice carried less certainty than before. Henrik Thornfield was a wanderer, a storyteller who took in strays. "Henrik Thornfield was my agent," Cordelia corrected, her tone carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Charged with protecting my granddaughter until she came of age to claim her inheritance. Her arrival here was not chance or desperation. It was destiny claiming what belongs to it." The political implications crashed over the crowd like an avalanche. If Evelyn was pack royalty, her bond with Darius wasn't just legitimate. It was the alliance between two powerful bloodlines that could reshape territorial boundaries across half the continent. "Prove it," Valeria demanded, but her earlier confidence was cracking around the edges. "Gladly," Cordelia gestured to Evelyn. "Show them, granddaughter. Show them what you've always been able to do." "I don't understand." "The music. The way it calls to the wild things, makes the weather respond, brings harmony to discord." Cordelia's smile held pride and sorrow in equal measure. "It's not learned skill or lucky coincidence. It's bloodline magic, passed down through generations of women who served as bridges between human and wolf." With shaking hands, Evelyn pulled out her wooden flute. The instrument felt different now, heavier with significance she was only beginning to understand. When she raised it to her lips, the first notes that emerged seemed to resonate through the ground itself. What followed defied every expectation. The melody that flowed from the flute was unlike anything she'd played before, complex harmonies that seemed to incorporate voices beyond her own. The very air shimmered with music that spoke directly to the wild hearts of every shifter present, calling to the wolf souls that lay beneath human facades. Around the ceremonial ground, flowers began to bloom out of season. Snow melted into streams that sparkled like liquid silver. Birds descended from the sky in spirals that matched the music's rhythm, while forest creatures emerged from the woodline to witness something they recognized as sacred. But it was the effect on the gathered packs that proved Cordelia's claims beyond doubt. One by one, the visiting alphas began to shift, not into aggressive wolf forms, but into the reverent postures of recognition. Even Valeria's carefully maintained composure cracked as her wolf responded to music that commanded, rather than requested. When the final note faded, the silence that followed felt pregnant with possibilities. "The Ravenwood gift," Cordelia said quietly. "Unchanged by generations of dormancy, awakened by love and necessity in equal measure. Why didn't Henrik tell me?" Evelyn's voice cracked with the weight of revelations that rewrote her entire understanding of herself. "Because knowing changes choices. Henrik wanted you to choose love for its own sake, not because prophecy or bloodline demanded it." Cordelia's eyes softened with grandmother's love that Evelyn had never known she was missing. "He wanted you to discover your own strength before learning it was inherited. And now? Now you choose what comes next. The inheritance is yours by right, but claiming it means accepting responsibilities that will change everything." Before Evelyn could respond, the ceremony ground erupted into chaos. "Ravenwood bloodline or not," Valeria snarled, finally abandoning her human form. "She's still an unclaimed female in disputed territory. Ancient law says she can be challenged for until the bonding is complete." The transformation that rippled through the visiting packs was instantaneous and terrifying. What had been political gathering became preparation for battle as dozens of wolves faced off across the ceremonial ground, growling challenges and territorial claims that turned air thick with tension. "Elena!" Darius shouted, his own shift beginning as alpha instincts kicked in. "The binding! Now!" But Elena was already moving, producing ceremonial tools with speed born of desperation. The bonding ritual that should have been celebration became race against violence as she began chanting words that would make Evelyn and Darius's union legally unbreakable. "Too late!" Valeria howled, launching herself across the space between them with claws extended and murder in her eyes. She never reached her target. The music that erupted from Evelyn's flute was unlike anything that had come before. Notes that seemed to bypass ears and resonate directly in bone and blood. Around the ceremonial ground, every wolf froze mid-charge as the melody wrapped around them like invisible chains. This wasn't the gentle harmony that had called flowers and birds. This was command distilled into sound, authority that spoke to the deepest instincts of pack animals who recognized alpha dominance when they heard it. "Enough!" Evelyn's voice carried over the music with power that made the air itself vibrate. "I am Evelyn Ravenwood, granddaughter of the High Counselor, heir to Northern Territories, and chosen mate of Alpha Darius. I claim right of territorial sovereignty and demand recognition under ancient law." The formal words, spoken with authority she hadn't known she possessed, transformed the standoff into something resembling civilization. Valeria, still frozen by music that held her wolf in submission, could only watch as Elena completed the bonding ritual with words that echoed across the ceremonial ground. "By earth and sky, by fire and water, by the bonds that tie pack to pack and heart to heart, I declare this union sanctified and unbreakable." The moment the final word left Elena's lips, everything changed. Power flowed between Evelyn and Darius like circuit completing. Bond that had been growing for months, finally snapping into place with intensity that left them both gasping. Around them, the assembled packs felt the shift as territorial boundaries redrew themselves, alliances reformed, and the balance of power tilted toward forces none of them had seen coming. When Evelyn finally lowered the flute, the silence that followed felt different. Not empty, but full of acknowledgement and acceptance that couldn't be challenged or undone. "Well," Cordelia said into that silence, her voice carrying satisfaction and relief in equal measure. "I believe that settles the question of legitimacy." The aftermath moved with dreamlike efficiency. Visiting packs offered formal recognition and withdrew to spread news that would reshape political landscapes across the continent. Valeria, her challenge legally invalidated by Evelyn's bloodline claims and completed bonding, left with promises of future cooperation that fooled no one but satisfied protocol. As the ceremonial ground emptied and ordinary life resumed, Evelyn found herself standing with Darius in the grove where they'd first been tested by the elders. Spring flowers bloomed around them in patterns that suggested the season had accelerated to match their happiness. "Any regrets?" Darius asked, echoing the question from what felt like lifetimes ago. "About discovering I'm pack royalty with inherited magical abilities and political responsibilities that span half the continent?" Evelyn leaned into his warmth, marveling at how right it felt to belong somewhere so completely. "Not a single one. Even though it means a lifetime of ceremonies and politics and people trying to use our bond for their own advantage. Especially because it means that." She turned in his arms, meeting eyes that held love and laughter and promises of adventures yet to come. "I spent my whole life running from places that didn't want me. Now I get to spend it fighting for one that does. And if the fighting gets too hard, then we face it together, the way we've faced everything else." As if summoned by their conversation, Elena appeared at the grove's entrance with Marcus and Mira in tow, all wearing expressions of barely contained excitement. "The Northern Council has sent word," Elena announced. "They're formally recognizing the territorial expansion and offering trade agreements that will make us the wealthiest pack in 3 states. The gardens are already responding to the new energy flows," Marcus added. "Healing herbs growing stronger, food crops promising harvests that could feed twice our current population. And the neighboring packs are sending delegations requesting alliance meetings." Mira finished with a grin that showed exactly what she thought of their former rivals' sudden friendliness. "Abundance," Evelyn murmured, remembering the old stories about rainmates who brought prosperity when welcomed. "You sound surprised," Darius replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is exactly what the prophecies promised." "I know. I just never thought I'd be the one fulfilling them." "Get used to it," Elena said dryly. "Because according to Cordelia, this is just the beginning. Ravenwood women tend to be overachievers. As the sun set over territory that now stretched farther than any of them had dreamed possible, Evelyn pulled out her flute one more time. The melody that emerged was different again, not command or summoning, but simple celebration of love found and challenges overcome. Around them, the forest responded with its own music. Wind through leaves, water over stones, the distant howls of wolves running free under stars that seemed to shine brighter than ever before. It was the sound of home, of belonging, of futures bright with possibility. 6 months ago, she had fled into these woods with nothing but desperation and a handful of mysterious gifts. Now she stood surrounded by family, chosen and inherited, love that had survived every test, and power she was still learning to understand. The girl who had run through rain and darkness was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth and refused to settle for anything less than everything she deserved. And as Darius pulled her closer, while their pack celebrated around them, Evelyn smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had finally, truly, come home. The forest had called, just as Henrik promised it would. But what it had offered was so much more than shelter. It had offered the chance to become everything she was meant to be, surrounded by people who saw her clearly and loved her completely. And that, she thought as music swirled around them like benediction, was worth any trial, any test, any challenge that might come. The rain began to fall again as they walked back toward the village, but this time it felt like blessing instead of punishment. Like the sky itself was celebrating their joy and promising abundance to come. After all, she was a rainmate now, and rainmates, as the stories always said, brought whatever the pack needed most. What they had needed was her. And what she had needed, it turned out, was them. The perfect symmetry of it made her laugh out loud, a sound of pure happiness that echoed through trees that would always be home.